The NFL Draft is a seminal moment for all the college football elite who have aspirations to play at the next level. Stakes are high, fortunes can be made, and the players' futures are hanging in the balance. And those very futures can be drastically altered at the whim of the NFL's general managers. One rich guy in a suit takes an interest in you, and bam! You're a multimillionaire. There is, however, a dark side to that coin, as we've seen quite a few players that were projected to be taken at the top of the draft, in some cases even first overall, who have fallen in the draft and fallen hard. In some cases, they've even fallen out of the first round, which can really take a chunk out of their bank account and their ego. Even if the player ultimately goes on to have a successful NFL career, they never seem to escape the public embarrassment of that fateful day. Aaron Rodgers is a great example of this. Back in the 2005 draft, he and Alex Smith were the two most highly touted quarterback prospects. Rodgers, however, had played his college ball at the University of California, and there was a certain stank that was automatically attached to Jeff Tedford's quarterbacks in college, as there had been quite a few who had built up a lot of hype before the draft and hadn't really panned out. Trent Dilfer, Joey Harrington, Akili Smith, and Kyle Bowler are all names that come to mind. Nevertheless, there was still a widespread belief that the young QB was going to be among the first names called. There's always been a premium on quarterbacking talent, and that class wasn't deep with it. Folks thought for sure that he would get picked up early. Otherwise, he probably wouldn't have gone to the draft for what ended up being a tumultuous and traumatizing stay in the Javits Center green room. Even after the San Francisco 49ers took Alex Smith first overall, it didn't seem like A-Rod would last much longer than that. But the picks started to fall off the board seemingly faster and faster until the first round was halfway over. With his face plastered on TVs all around the world, Rodgers sat there until finally the Packers took him 24th overall. Quite a tumble for someone who was supposed to be among the first chosen. Obviously, things worked out pretty well for Rodgers. So, I guess no harm, no foul. Going to Green Bay gave him a chance to learn behind Brett Favre, which also may have been somewhat traumatic in its own way, but hey, formative and beneficial as well. All in all, enduring that embarrassment paid off pretty good for number 12. Interestingly, this is not too dissimilar to what played out with another legendary signal caller in the mid-80s, Dan Marino. Marino, a Hall of Famer in his own right, played his college ball at the University of Pittsburgh and was part of the illustrious 1983 draft class that saw 5 other quarterbacks taken in the first round, 2 of whom were also Hall of Famers in John Elway and Jim Kelly. Needless to say, ahead of the draft day, the consensus was all over the place as to which order these 3 QBs were going to be taken. Few, however, anticipated that Marino, who had one of the most impressive arms of the bunch, would be the one to tumble down the draft board all the way to the 27th pick, even after he had a relatively lackluster senior year. There was also a whirlwind of rumors around Dan that affected his draft stock. He had gained a reputation among pundits for his affinity for the nightlife in Pittsburgh, which, yes, I know sounds like an oxymoron, but people started to talk, and the rumor emerged that he had a bit of a drug problem. This has never really been substantiated, but that, in tandem with his down senior year season, was enough to scare off most of the teams that had a need at the position. While Marino and Rodgers' respective falls both proved to be massive errors on the parts of scouts around the league, that isn't always the case when a high-profile quarterback prospect tumbles in the draft. Both Matt Leinart and Brady Quinn were highly touted coming out of USC and Notre Dame respectively, and they both had embarrassing falls on draft day that were eventually justified. Starting with Leinart, he won the Heisman Trophy in 2004 and 2 national championships, one of which was vacated if you believe in that sort of thing. And though he was surrounded by immense talent on that Trojan team, there was still a general belief amongst the public that he would be a solid pro, even if he was left-handed, something that always seems to rub people a certain kind of way. The big debate heading into the 2006 draft was which QB you would rather take, Vince Young from Texas or Leinart. The two had squared off in one of the most epic games in college football history, but neither really fit the traditional NFL QB prototype. There's also a good bit of non-quarterback competition at the top of the draft, including Leinart's teammate, Reggie Bush, who was ultimately taken 2nd overall by the New Orleans Saints. Other talented players included Mario Williams, who went 1st overall, and of course, names like DeBrickshaw Ferguson, Jay Cutler, and Vernon Davis. When all was said and done, Leinart, who many believed could be not just the first quarterback, but even the first player taken, fell out of the top 5 and was taken 10th overall by the Arizona Cardinals. Looking back at his career, it might be hard to believe, but this was a huge surprise at the time. Quinn, on the other hand, entered the NFL draft the following year, and though he didn't have quite as glowing as a resume in college as Leinart, he was considered to be among the top at his position. And let's be honest, he was the quarterback for some solid Notre Dame teams, which means he was destined to get overhyped because, yeah, it's Notre Dame. Heading into the draft, Quinn got a lot of buzz for being NFL ready because his coach, Charlie Weiss, had been pivotal in the New England Patriots offensive system for years before jumping ship to lead the Fighting Irish. And people believed that Quinn's experience in Weiss's system would bode well for him at the next level. As it turns out, most of those people were in the media and not in the NFL war rooms. Closing out the quarterbacks on this list, there's one name remaining, a more recent guy, who time will still have to tell if his slide down the draft boards was a mistake or not. Kenny Pickett, who, like Dan Marino, played QB at the University of Pitt and coincidentally landed with the Pittsburgh Steelers after they selected him with the 20th overall pick. In Pickett's case, he didn't really have the top 5 buzz that a lot of these other quarterbacks did. But still, he was considered to be the top quarterback in this draft, and many draft pundits figured at a minimum he'd go top 10. Next up, we have one of the crazier draft day sagas we've ever seen. That of Laramie Tunsil, the former Ole Miss offensive tackle who was taken 13th overall by the Miami Dolphins. Though you might think that 13 is still relatively high for an offensive lineman, heading into that draft, he was the consensus number 1 overall pick. That is, until the unthinkable happened. And minutes before the draft, a video circulated around Twitter of him ripping some ganja with a gas mask on. While 2016 doesn't feel that long ago, the national perception of marijuana was pretty different back then.
Do not sell marijuana to my husband.
And the visual of him doing so with a gas mask was admittedly pretty jarring. Apparently jarring enough to scare off the first 12 teams who could have and likely would have taken the future Pro Bowler. He was still a multimillionaire in South Beach, and he's gone on to have success in the league and make a whole lot more money. Kind of like what we saw happen with former Cowboys wide receiver Dez Bryant. Coming out of Oklahoma State, Bryant's talent was not up for debate. As a sophomore, he put up 87 catches for 1,480 yards and an insane 19 touchdowns. So heading into his junior year, which many believe to be his final collegiate season, the hype was at an all-time high. Unfortunately, he ended up getting ruled ineligible just 3 games into the year for failure to disclose an interaction with Deion Sanders. Even so, there was a belief that he could still actually go first overall if things broke his way. He was just that special of a talent. But his scandal, along with a slew of off-the-field concerns that started to get louder and louder, began to scare NFL GMs. And apparently, his draft interviews were far from graceful. As a result, Bryant ended up sliding all the way down to 24, where the Cowboys traded up with the Patriots to take him. It wasn't always easy between the two sides, but all in all, I'd say that calculated risk worked out pretty well for both parties, even if Dez had to endure an embarrassing draft day slide. Though he wasn't quite the prospect Bryant was, Vontaze Burfict had quite a saga for himself back in 2012, when the linebacker out of Arizona State went from being widely considered as a first-round pick to going undrafted entirely. That was the result of his reputation for playing out of control both on the field and off of it. His draft stock continued to plummet after a poor showing at the NFL Combine, in which he ran a 5.09 second 40, the slowest among all linebackers. He also apparently made the mistake of admitting marijuana use to NFL general managers who, like a good parent, just wanted you to lie to them during the draft process. The review on this embarrassing fall in the draft is pretty mixed. Burfict did go on to become a Pro Bowler, but his quick trigger continued to plague him at the NFL level as well. At least Burfict was actually involved in the transgressions that caused him to get embarrassed on one of the most important days of a young player's career, because Lyle Collins, well, he was the very definition of wrong place, wrong time, and paid a severe price for it, both monetarily and with his reputation. Heading into the 2015 NFL Draft, Collins was considered to be a top 10 prospect, maybe even a top 5. which would change his life immediately. However, after it was announced that he was scheduled to talk to Louisiana police about the death of a pregnant woman that happened to be his ex, his stock started to fall. The crazy thing is, he wasn't even considered a suspect in the case, but just his mere association was enough to make teams skittish, creating a horrible situation for the young man. All in all, this might be the worst one on this list because not only did he have the humiliation of falling in the draft, but there were also serious allegations being tossed around about him for something that he had nothing to do with, simply because he knew someone that had died. Crazy. Last but not least, we have Thurman Thomas, a running back who came out of Oklahoma State into the 1988 draft. Thomas was part of a legendary backfield in college, which he shared with a guy by the name of Barry Sanders. Two future Hall of Famers. Just an insane amount of talent for one college backfield. Anyway, though, Thomas was one of the best backs in the country throughout his time at OSU. But NFL scouts were scared by an injury to his knee that he sustained back in the summer between his sophomore and junior season. The strange thing about this was he bounced back well his senior year, rushing for a monster total of 1,613 yards, which was good enough for third in the country. 7 other running backs were ultimately taken before the Bills took him 40th overall midway through the second round. 7. And man, I bet the Bills were happy he fell to them, because Thomas would go on to set the franchise rushing record with 11,938 yards and was a huge part of some really talented 90s Bills teams. He also won MVP honors in 1991 and set a bevy of records along the way. And to think, he was the guy stuck between a rock and a hard place on draft day. But which NFL draft day slide do you think was the most embarrassing? Was there anyone that we missed? Let us know in the comment section below. If you like this video and learned a thing or two, clicking the like button helps out a ton. And hey, we appreciate it. If this is your first time coming around to TPS though, subscribing is a great idea because we put out videos like this every single day. But as always, thanks for watching and we'll see you guys next time.